The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sarah Martinez laced up her combat boots for what would become the most defining day of her career. At 26, she had already spent 8 years in the Army, but today felt different. Today, she would finally be joining the elite reconnaissance unit she had trained for over the past 2 years. Sarah had grown up in a small Texas town where military service ran in families like a sacred tradition. Her grandfather had fought in World War II, her father in Vietnam, and her 3 older brothers had all served in various conflicts. When Sarah announced her intention to join the Army at 18, her family's reaction had been mixed. Her mother worried about her safety while her father expressed concerns about whether the military was really the right place for a young woman. Despite these doubts, Sarah had proven herself exceptional from day one of basic training. She could outrun most of her male counterparts, had perfect marksmanship scores, and displayed natural leadership abilities that impressed even the most skeptical drill sergeants. Her determination stemmed not from a desire to prove women could be soldiers, but from a genuine calling to serve her country and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The reconnaissance unit she was joining had a reputation for being one of the most dangerous assignments in the military. These soldiers operated behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence and conducting high-risk missions that regular infantry couldn't handle. Out of the 200 soldiers who had applied for the unit that year, only 12 had been selected. Sarah was the only woman. As she walked toward the briefing room that morning, Sarah could feel the eyes of other soldiers on her. Some looked curious, others skeptical, and a few seemed openly hostile. She had grown accustomed to being the only woman in predominantly male environments, but the intensity of the stares today felt different. This wasn't just about being a female soldier anymore. This was about being a woman in what many considered the most elite fighting force on the base. The briefing room was already filled when Sarah arrived. 11 men in their 20s and 30s sat in metal chairs, all with the same serious expression that came with knowing they were about to embark on something dangerous and important. The commanding officer, Colonel James Harrison, was a decorated veteran with over 20 years of experience in special operations. He had a reputation for being fair but demanding, and for not tolerating any behavior that could compromise mission success. Colonel Harrison began the briefing by explaining their upcoming deployment. They would be heading to a hostile region where intelligence suggested enemy forces were planning a major offensive against Allied positions. The reconnaissance unit's job was to infiltrate the area, gather detailed information about enemy movements and capabilities, and relay that intelligence back to command. It was exactly the kind of mission Sarah had trained for, and despite the inherent dangers, she felt excited to finally put her skills to use in a real-world situation. After the formal briefing ended, the soldiers were given time to introduce themselves and begin building the team cohesion that would be crucial for mission success. Sarah quickly learned that her new teammates came from diverse backgrounds but shared similar motivations for joining the elite unit. There was Marcus Thompson, a former college football player from Ohio who had joined the Army after his younger brother was killed in a terrorist attack. David Kim was a computer specialist from California who had volunteered for combat duty despite having safer options available. James Rodriguez had grown up in Chicago and saw military service as a way to honor his immigrant parents who had worked multiple jobs to give him opportunities they never had. As the introductions continued, Sarah began to feel cautiously optimistic about her integration into the team. The men seemed professional and focused on the mission ahead. Several even expressed respect for her training scores and the fact that she had made it through the selection process. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe this assignment would be different from her previous experiences, where she constantly had to prove herself worthy of respect and inclusion. However, her optimism was short-lived. During a break in the day's activities, Sarah overheard a conversation that would change everything. She had gone to get coffee from the break room when she heard voices from the adjoining equipment room. Through the partially open door, she could see 3 of her new teammates talking in low voices. "I still can't believe they let a woman into the unit," one of them was saying. "I mean, what happens when things get really intense out there? We can't be worrying about protecting her when we should be focusing on the mission." "Yeah, and let's be honest," another voice chimed in. "Women just don't have what it takes for this kind of work. They might be fine for support roles, but when it comes to actual combat, especially the kind of fighting we'll be doing, they're more of a liability than an asset." The third voice laughed before adding what would become the comment that haunted Sarah for weeks. Women can't have kill counts like real soldiers. They're just not built for taking lives when it matters most. She'll probably freeze up the first time she has to actually shoot someone who's shooting back. Sarah felt her stomach drop as the words sank in. She had heard similar sentiments before, but never from soldiers who were supposed to be her teammates, people whose lives might depend on her actions and whose lives her own survival would depend on. The casual way they dismissed her capabilities, reducing her years of training and proven competence to outdated stereotypes about gender roles, hit harder than she had expected. She quietly returned to the main briefing room, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to confront the men immediately, to challenge their assumptions, and demand the respect her qualifications had earned. Another part of her worried that causing conflict before they had even deployed would only confirm their prejudices about women being too emotional or difficult to work with in high-pressure situations. Sarah decided to keep quiet for the moment, but she made a private vow that she would prove them wrong through her actions rather than her words. She would show them that not only could women serve effectively in combat roles, but that she specifically was someone they could count on when lives were at stake. She had no way of knowing that her opportunity to do exactly that would come much sooner than anyone expected. The rest of the day passed in a blur of equipment checks, mission planning, and tactical discussions. Sarah participated fully in all activities, offering insights when appropriate and asking questions that demonstrated her understanding of the mission requirements. She noticed that the three men from the equipment room seemed to go out of their way to avoid meaningful interaction with her, though they remained professionally polite when direct communication was necessary. As evening approached, Colonel Harrison announced that their deployment would begin in just 3 days. This was much sooner than originally planned, but intelligence had indicated that the window for gathering crucial information was closing rapidly. The accelerated timeline meant that team bonding activities would be minimal, and they would need to rely on their professional training and individual competence rather than well-established personal relationships. That night, Sarah lay in her bunk thinking about the challenge ahead. She had worked harder than most people could imagine to reach this point in her career. Every physical fitness test, every training exercise, every evaluation had been an opportunity to prove that she belonged in the Army, despite being a woman. She had consistently exceeded standards not because the standards were easy for her, but because she refused to give anyone a reason to doubt her capabilities. The conversation she had overheard that day reminded her that no matter how well she performed or how many achievements she accumulated, there would always be people who saw her gender before they saw her qualifications. The comment about women not being able to have kill counts particularly stung because it reduced the complex realities of military service to a crude scorecard that missed the point of what soldiers were actually supposed to accomplish. Sarah understood that taking a life, even in combat, was not something to be celebrated or turned into a competition. Every soldier she respected had explained that the goal was to complete missions and protect fellow service members, not to accumulate statistics. The fact that her teammates seemed to view combat effectiveness through such a narrow lens made her question their maturity and professionalism, even as she recognized that she would need to work with them regardless of her personal opinions. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah was filled with determination to prove herself worthy of the trust Colonel Harrison had placed in her by including her in the unit. She had no way of knowing that within a few weeks, she would find herself in a situation that would not only validate her presence in the unit, but would fundamentally change how her teammates viewed both her capabilities and their own assumptions about women in combat. The next morning brought intensive mission preparation activities. The team spent hours studying maps, reviewing intelligence reports, and rehearsing scenarios they might encounter once deployed. Sarah threw herself into these preparations with characteristic focus, memorizing every detail that might be relevant to mission success and contributing tactical insights that demonstrated her strategic thinking abilities. During weapons training that afternoon, Sarah's marksmanship skills drew attention from across the range. Her shots consistently grouped tighter than those of most of her teammates, and her speed in acquiring and engaging targets was notably superior. Even the three men who had questioned her capabilities seemed surprised by her performance, though they were careful not to show it openly. Marcus Thompson, who had become the informal leader among the enlisted personnel, approached Sarah after the training session ended. "You're a hell of a shot," he said simply. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah appreciated the straightforward compliment. "My dad taught me when I was 8, she explained. We used to hunt together every fall, and he always said that if you're going to carry a weapon, you have a responsibility to be able to use it properly. I've been practicing ever since." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Well, it shows. That kind of accuracy could make the difference between mission success and failure where we're going." It was a small moment, but Sarah felt encouraged by the recognition from someone whose opinion clearly mattered to the rest of the team. She began to hope that maybe her skills would speak louder than the prejudices she had encountered. The helicopter's rotors thundered overhead as Sarah and her 11 teammates prepared for insertion into hostile territory. After 3 intense days of final preparations, they were finally embarking on the mission that would test everything they had trained for. The aircraft flew low through the darkness, using night vision and terrain-following radar to avoid enemy detection while approaching the drop zone. Sarah checked her equipment one final time, running through the mental checklist she had memorized years ago. Her rifle was clean and properly zeroed, her communications gear was functioning, and her pack contained everything she would need for the next 72 hours. Around her, the other soldiers were making similar preparations, their faces serious in the dim red light of the helicopter's interior. Colonel Harrison's voice crackled through their headsets as he provided final instructions. The mission was straightforward in concept, but dangerous in execution. They would be inserted at a location approximately 15 miles from their target area, then move on foot through mountainous terrain to establish observation posts overlooking suspected enemy positions. Their job was to gather intelligence on troop movements, equipment, and defensive preparations while remaining undetected. The helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone, and Sarah felt the familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement that came before any dangerous mission. She had been on similar operations before, but never with stakes this high, or with a team that included soldiers who questioned her basic competence. The weight of representing all women in the military felt heavier than her 60-pound pack. As they approached the drop zone, the pilot's voice came over the intercom with an urgent warning. Enemy radar had detected their aircraft, and they could see searchlights sweeping the area below. The insertion would need to happen faster than planned, with less precision in their landing location. Colonel Harrison made the decision to proceed, knowing that aborting the mission would eliminate their narrow window of opportunity. The helicopter touched down hard in a clearing that was smaller and more exposed than their planned landing zone. The soldiers quickly exited the aircraft, spreading out in a defensive perimeter as the helicopter departed into the darkness. Within seconds, they could hear the distant sound of vehicles approaching their location, indicating that enemy forces were moving to investigate the helicopter's presence. Colonel Harrison quickly assessed their situation and made a series of rapid decisions that would split the team into smaller groups. The original plan had called for them to move as a single unit, but their compromised insertion meant they needed to disperse immediately to avoid being captured or killed by the responding enemy forces. Sarah found herself assigned to a 4-person team led by Sergeant David Kim, along with Marcus Thompson and one of the soldiers who had questioned her capabilities, Corporal Jake Stevens. The 4 soldiers moved quickly away from the landing zone, using night vision equipment to navigate through dense forest terrain that would provide cover from enemy patrols. Sarah's years of training in navigation and fieldcraft proved invaluable as she helped identify routes that would minimize their visibility while still allowing them to reach their assigned observation area. Her teammates began to appreciate her skills as they realized how effectively she could move through difficult terrain without creating noise or leaving obvious tracks. After 3 hours of careful movement, they reached a ridgeline that provided excellent observation of the valley where intelligence suggested enemy forces were concentrating. Sarah and her teammates established a hidden observation post among large rocks and vegetation, carefully positioning themselves to maintain visual contact with the target area while remaining concealed from enemy patrols. As dawn broke, Sarah got her first clear look at what they were facing. The valley below contained a much larger enemy force than intelligence had suggested. Instead of a few hundred soldiers, she could see evidence of at least 2,000 troops, along with heavy equipment including tanks, artillery, and anti-aircraft weapons. The scope of the enemy presence indicated that they were planning something much more significant than the defensive operation that command had anticipated. David Kim quietly radioed their initial observations back to headquarters, while Sarah documented the enemy positions with a high-powered camera and detailed notes. Her attention to detail and ability to accurately estimate distances and identify equipment types impressed her teammates, who began to rely on her expertise in analyzing what they were observing. The first 2 days of the mission passed without major incident. Sarah and her team gathered extensive intelligence while remaining undetected by enemy patrols that occasionally passed near their position. However, their situation became more dangerous on the third morning when enemy forces began conducting systematic searches of the surrounding hills, apparently having realized that observation teams might be monitoring their activities. Sarah was on watch duty when she spotted a patrol of 6 enemy soldiers moving directly toward their position. They were still several hundred meters away, but their route would bring them close enough to discover the observation post within the next 20 minutes. She quietly alerted her teammates, and David Kim faced a difficult decision about whether to maintain their position and hope the patrol would pass by, or to relocate immediately and risk being spotted during movement. The decision was made for them when one of the enemy soldiers began using binoculars to systematically scan the ridgeline where they were hidden. Sarah could see that it would only be a matter of minutes before their position was discovered. David Kim made the call to abandon their observation post and move to a backup location they had identified earlier in the mission. As the 4 soldiers began carefully moving away from their compromised position, Sarah noticed something that the others had missed. A second enemy patrol was approaching from the direction of their planned escape route, effectively trapping them between 2 groups of hostile forces. The situation had suddenly become much more dangerous than a simple relocation. Sarah quickly assessed their options and realized that their best chance of survival was to move along the ridgeline to a position that would allow them to observe both enemy patrols while remaining hidden. It was a risky plan that would require precise timing and complete silence, but it seemed like their only alternative to being discovered and potentially killed or captured. The team began moving toward Sarah's suggested position, but Jake Stevens, the soldier who had questioned her capabilities, made a critical error. While navigating around a large boulder, he dislodged several small rocks that created enough noise to alert the nearest enemy patrol. Within seconds, the soldiers below were pointing in their direction and beginning to move up the slope to investigate. David Kim made the difficult decision that their mission was over and that their priority now was simply to survive and escape. He instructed the team to begin moving toward their designated extraction point, approximately 8 miles away, through difficult terrain that would now be swarming with enemy patrols looking for them. What followed was 12 hours of the most intense and dangerous experience of Sarah's military career. The 4 soldiers moved through mountainous terrain while being actively hunted by enemy forces, who knew their general location and were determined to capture or kill them. They had to avoid multiple patrols, cross open areas under the cover of darkness, and navigate treacherous terrain while carrying heavy equipment and maintaining radio silence to avoid detection. Sarah's training and natural abilities proved crucial during the escape. Her skills in fieldcraft allowed the team to avoid several enemy patrols that came dangerously close to their position. Her physical conditioning enabled her to maintain the grueling pace that was necessary to stay ahead of their pursuers. Most importantly, her calm demeanor under extreme stress helped keep the team focused and organized during moments when panic could have led to fatal mistakes. As they approached the extraction point, David Kim radioed for helicopter pickup, but the response was not what they had hoped to hear. Enemy anti-aircraft weapons in the area made helicopter extraction too dangerous during daylight hours. They would need to hold their position for another 18 hours until darkness provided cover for the rescue aircraft. The team found a defensible position among large rocks near the extraction point and settled in for what they all knew would be a long and dangerous wait. Enemy patrols were still searching for them, and it was only a matter of time before their hiding place was discovered. They had limited ammunition, no heavy weapons, and no possibility of reinforcement if they were attacked by a superior force. Sarah took first watch while her teammates tried to rest, knowing they would need all their energy for whatever was to come. As she scanned the surrounding terrain for signs of enemy movement, she reflected on how much had changed since the conversation she had overheard just a week earlier. Her teammates no longer questioned her competence or dedication. Jake Stevens had even quietly thanked her for the navigation skills that had helped them avoid several enemy patrols during their escape. However, Sarah knew that their real test was still ahead. They had successfully completed the intelligence gathering portion of their mission, but they still needed to survive long enough for extraction. The enemy forces searching for them were getting closer, and she could see signs that suggested they would be found long before darkness made helicopter pickup possible. As the sun reached its highest point in the sky, Sarah spotted movement that confirmed her worst fears. A large enemy patrol was moving systematically through the area, checking every possible hiding place. Based on their route and pace, they would reach Sarah's team's position within 2 hours. The 4 soldiers faced a choice between attempting to relocate again, which would almost certainly result in their discovery, or staying in place and preparing for a fight they were unlikely to win. David Kim gathered his 3 teammates for a quiet conference about their options. The consensus was that their current position was defensible, but that they would be heavily outnumbered if discovered. Their best chance was to remain hidden and hope the enemy patrol would miss their location, but everyone understood that hope was not a reliable military strategy. As they prepared for what might be their final hours, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had joined the army to serve her country and protect others, and now she faced the possibility of making the ultimate sacrifice in fulfillment of that commitment. The irony was not lost on her that the same people who had questioned whether women could have kill counts might soon depend on her ability to use deadly force to save their lives. The enemy patrol was now less than a kilometer away, and Sarah could hear their voices echoing off the rocky terrain as they methodically searched every potential hiding place. Through her binoculars, she counted 12 soldiers, all heavily armed and moving with the confidence of troops operating in friendly territory. Her own team of 4 was outnumbered 3-1. With limited ammunition and no possibility of reinforcement. David Kim positioned his soldiers to maximize their defensive capabilities while minimizing their visibility. Sarah found herself assigned to the position with the best field of fire, a recognition of her superior marksmanship skills that would have been unthinkable just days earlier when some of her teammates had questioned whether women belonged in combat roles. Now, as enemy soldiers drew closer to their hiding place, those same teammates were counting on her accuracy to help them survive. The waiting was the hardest part. Sarah had been trained to remain calm under pressure, but the combination of being outnumbered, cut off from support, and facing almost certain discovery created a level of stress unlike anything she had experienced before. She controlled her breathing and focused on the fundamentals she had learned years ago. Proper sight alignment, steady trigger control, and the mental discipline to make accurate shots even when her own life depended on the outcome. Marcus Thompson, positioned to Sarah's left, caught her attention with a series of hand signals. The enemy patrol had split into 2 groups, with one group moving along the ridgeline while the other approached from below. This tactical decision by the enemy commander would make the coming fight even more difficult, as Sarah's team would need to defend against attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. Through her rifle scope, Sarah could now clearly see individual enemy soldiers as they moved closer to her position. They were young men, probably not much different from the soldiers in her own unit, but they represented a deadly threat that had to be neutralized if she and her teammates were going to survive. The abstract concept of kill counts that her teammates had joked about suddenly became a harsh reality of military service. The first shot came from Jake Stevens' position as an enemy soldier stumbled upon their hiding place and began to raise his weapon. Jake's shot was accurate, dropping the enemy soldier instantly, but it also announced their location to the rest of the patrol. Within seconds, the quiet mountain morning erupted into the chaos of close-range combat. Sarah acquired her first target, an enemy soldier who was attempting to flank their position from the right. Her shot was perfect, hitting the soldier's center mass and eliminating the immediate threat to Marcus Thompson's position. She quickly shifted to a second target, an enemy machine gunner who was setting up his weapon to provide covering fire for his advancing teammates. Her second shot was equally accurate, preventing the enemy from establishing fire superiority. The intensity of the firefight was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during training. Real bullets were impacting the rocks around her position, sending sharp fragments flying in all directions. The sound of automatic weapons fire was deafening, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. Despite the chaos, Sarah's training took over. David Kim's voice cut through the noise of battle as he coordinated their defense and called for supporting fire from different positions. Sarah shifted her attention to a group of 3 enemy soldiers who were attempting to advance up the slope toward Jake Stevens' position. Her rapid, accurate shooting forced them to seek cover, buying precious time for Jake to relocate to a more defensible position. The battle continued for what felt like hours but was actually only about 15 minutes. Sarah lost count of how many shots she fired, but each one was deliberate and aimed at eliminating specific threats to her teammates' survival. Her superior marksmanship skills, combined with her ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, made her the most effective member of the defensive team. As the firefight gradually subsided, Sarah realized that the enemy patrol had been either killed or forced to withdraw. The immediate threat was over, but she knew that the sound of gunfire would have alerted other enemy forces in the area. They now had very little time before larger enemy units would arrive to investigate the engagement. David Kim quickly assessed their situation while the other team members checked for wounds and redistributed ammunition. Remarkably, none of the 4 soldiers had been seriously injured, though all of them had several minor cuts from rock fragments and close calls with enemy bullets. Their ammunition was now dangerously low, and they were still more than 12 hours away from their scheduled extraction time. "Outstanding work," David Kim told Sarah as they prepared to abandon their position. "Your shooting probably saved all our lives back there." It was a simple statement, but Sarah could hear the genuine respect and gratitude in his voice. The theoretical debates about women in combat had been replaced by the practical reality of soldiers depending on each other for survival. As they began moving toward a new position, Marcus Thompson approached Sarah with an expression she had never seen before. The friendly but somewhat condescending attitude he had shown earlier was gone, replaced by the serious respect that combat veterans showed to proven fighters. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said quietly as they walked. "Before this mission, I had my doubts about women in combat units. I thought they might be a liability when things got really intense. I was wrong, and I owe you an apology." Sarah appreciated the honesty, but her focus was on the immediate challenges they still faced. "We can talk about it after we get home," she replied simply. "Right now, we need to concentrate on staying alive long enough for extraction." The 4 soldiers spent the next several hours moving through increasingly dangerous terrain as enemy forces converged on their general location. Sarah's navigation skills and fieldcraft abilities continued to prove invaluable, helping the team avoid several large enemy patrols while making progress toward alternative extraction points that might be safer than their original location. During a brief rest stop, Jake Stevens finally addressed the elephant in the room that had been troubling him since the firefight. "Sarah," he said hesitantly, "I owe you more than an apology. Before this mission, I said some things about women soldiers that were completely wrong. You've proven that courage and competence have nothing to do with gender." Sarah looked at the young soldier who had been one of her harshest critics just days earlier. Jake was barely 22 years old, and she realized that his prejudices had probably come from inexperience and cultural influences rather than personal malice. The combat they had just survived together had taught him lessons that no amount of classroom instruction could have provided. "Everyone has to learn sometime," Sarah replied diplomatically. "The important thing is that we work as a team from now on." As the day wore on, the team's situation became increasingly desperate. Enemy forces had apparently called in reinforcements from other areas, and the mountains were now swarming with hostile patrols looking for the American soldiers. Radio communication with their headquarters was sporadic due to the terrain and enemy jamming efforts, making it difficult to coordinate extraction or call for support. During one particularly close call, the team found themselves pinned down by an enemy patrol that had spotted them crossing an open area. Sarah's marksmanship skills once again proved crucial, as she was able to provide accurate covering fire that allowed her teammates to reach safety. Her ability to make difficult shots under pressure had become the team's primary tactical advantage. As evening finally began to approach, David Kim received a radio message that both relieved and concerned the team. A helicopter extraction was possible, but it would need to happen at a location that was currently occupied by enemy forces. The 4 soldiers would need to fight their way to the extraction point and hold it long enough for the rescue aircraft to land and pick them up. The plan was extremely dangerous, but it represented their best chance of survival. The alternative was to continue evading enemy patrols with limited ammunition and supplies, hoping to reach friendly territory on foot across more than 50 miles of hostile terrain. Everyone understood that their odds of success were better if they concentrated their efforts on reaching the extraction point. Sarah studied the map and aerial photographs of their target area, identifying the best approach routes and defensive positions. Her tactical insights, combined with her proven combat effectiveness, made her opinion particularly valuable as the team planned their final push to safety. There's a ridgeline here that would give us good overwatch of the landing zone, she pointed out. If I can get into position there with good fields of fire, I can cover the approach and provide security while the helicopter lands. David Kim studied her suggestion carefully before nodding his agreement. That's a good plan, but it also puts you in the most exposed position. Are you sure you want to take that risk? Sarah looked at her 3 teammates, soldiers who had started this mission with serious doubts about her capabilities, but now trusted her with their lives. It's the best way to get everyone home safely, she said simply. That's what we're here for. As darkness finally began to fall, the 4 soldiers prepared for what they all knew would be the most dangerous part of their mission. They had already proven themselves as a team under the most extreme circumstances, but their ultimate survival would depend on executing a complex plan with perfect timing while under fire from superior enemy forces. Sarah checked her rifle one final time and prepared for what might be the most important shooting of her military career. The comments about women not being able to have kill counts seemed like ancient history now. What mattered was that her teammates trusted her, and she was determined not to let them down. The extraction point lay in a valley surrounded by hills that provided excellent cover for enemy forces but left the landing zone dangerously exposed. Sarah and her 3 teammates moved through the darkness with the careful precision of soldiers who understood that a single mistake could cost them their lives. The helicopter was scheduled to arrive in exactly 45 minutes, giving them a narrow window to secure the area and eliminate any threats that might endanger the rescue aircraft. Through her night vision equipment, Sarah could see at least 8 enemy soldiers positioned around the landing zone. They had apparently anticipated that the American team might attempt extraction from this location and had prepared an ambush. The enemy positions were well concealed and mutually supporting, making this final engagement potentially the most difficult of the entire mission. David Kim gathered his team for final coordination before they moved into position. The plan was for Sarah to take the overwatch position on the ridgeline, while the other 3 soldiers approached the landing zone from different directions. Once Sarah was in position, she would begin eliminating enemy threats while her teammates moved to secure the immediate area around where the helicopter would land. Remember, we need to clear this area completely, David Kim whispered. If even one enemy soldier with a rocket launcher is still alive when that helicopter arrives, we all die. Sarah, your job is to identify and neutralize the biggest threats first, then provide covering fire as needed. Sarah made her way up the rocky slope to her assigned position, moving with the silent efficiency she had perfected through years of training and recent combat experience. The ridgeline offered excellent fields of fire, covering most of the valley, but it also made her visible to enemy forces once she began shooting. She would need to eliminate multiple targets quickly before they could coordinate a response that would overwhelm her position. From her elevated position, Sarah had a clear view of the enemy dispositions below. She identified several priority targets: a machine gun team positioned to rake the landing zone with automatic weapons fire, 2 soldiers with what appeared to be rocket-propelled grenades, and a communications specialist who was likely coordinating the ambush with other enemy forces in the area. The sound of the approaching helicopter could now be heard in the distance, still several minutes away but growing steadily louder. Sarah knew that the enemy soldiers below could hear it too, and they would be preparing to spring their trap as soon as the aircraft came within range. She had to begin shooting soon, but her first shots would need to be perfect to maintain the element of surprise. Sarah's first target was the machine gunner, whose weapon posed the greatest threat to both her teammates and the incoming helicopter. She controlled her breathing, aligned her sights precisely, and squeezed the trigger with the steady pressure she had practiced thousands of times. The shot was perfect, eliminating the machine gunner instantly and creating immediate confusion among the other enemy soldiers who were not sure where the attack was coming from. Her second shot took down one of the soldiers with rocket-propelled grenades, preventing him from engaging the helicopter with a weapon that could destroy the aircraft with a single hit. The remaining enemy soldiers were now beginning to react to the sniper fire, some taking cover while others tried to locate Sarah's position on the ridgeline. The communications specialist was Sarah's third target, and eliminating him would prevent the enemy from calling for reinforcements or coordinating their defensive response. Her shot was accurate, but the soldier managed to get off a radio transmission before collapsing. Sarah knew that additional enemy forces were now aware of the situation and might be moving toward the extraction point. Marcus Thompson's voice crackled through her earpiece. as he and the other two soldiers began their approach to the landing zone. "Excellent shooting, Sarah. You've eliminated the primary threats, but we're seeing movement from the north that suggests more enemy soldiers are approaching your position." Sarah shifted her attention to the new threat, identifying at least 6 additional enemy soldiers who were moving up the slope toward her position. They had apparently located her muzzle flashes and were attempting to eliminate the sniper who was disrupting their ambush. She would need to engage multiple targets while preparing to relocate if her position became untenable. The incoming helicopter was now clearly visible, approaching the valley at low altitude to minimize its exposure to enemy fire. Sarah could see that it was a smaller aircraft than originally planned, which meant it would need to make multiple trips to extract all the reconnaissance teams that were operating in the area. Getting this first extraction right was crucial not only for Sarah's team but for the other soldiers who would depend on the same landing zone later. Sarah engaged the approaching enemy soldiers with rapid, accurate fire, forcing them to take cover and buying precious time for the helicopter to land safely. However, her ammunition was running dangerously low, and she knew she couldn't maintain this level of fire indefinitely. She would need to make every remaining shot count. The helicopter touched down in the center of the landing zone, as David Kim, Marcus Thompson, and Jake Stevens provided close security around the aircraft. Sarah continued to provide overwatch from her position, engaging enemy soldiers who attempted to fire at the helicopter or her teammates. Her shooting was methodical and precise, each shot eliminating a specific threat to the extraction operation. "Sarah, we need you down here now." David Kim's voice came through her earpiece with urgent intensity. "We're taking fire from positions you can't see from up there, and the helicopter needs to leave immediately." Sarah quickly gathered her equipment and began moving down the slope toward the landing zone, all while maintaining awareness of enemy soldiers who were still trying to reach her former position. The descent was treacherous in the darkness, but she had no choice except to move as quickly as possible while avoiding the increasing volume of enemy fire. As she approached the helicopter, Sarah could see muzzle flashes from multiple enemy positions that had been concealed from her overwatch location. Her teammates were engaged in close-range firefights with enemy soldiers who had infiltrated much closer to the landing zone than anyone had realized. The situation was rapidly becoming desperate. Sarah reached the helicopter just as Jake Stevens took a bullet in his shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground near the aircraft's open door. Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed the wounded soldier and helped him into the helicopter while simultaneously returning fire at the enemy soldiers who were attempting to overrun their position. "Get us out of here!" David Kim shouted to the helicopter pilot as all 4 soldiers finally made it aboard the aircraft. The pilot needed no additional encouragement, pulling the helicopter into a steep climb that quickly carried them out of range of enemy small arms fire. As the aircraft gained altitude and began flying toward friendly territory, Sarah finally allowed herself to believe that they were going to survive. The mission that had started with questions about her competence and belonging had ended with her teammates owing their lives to her marksmanship skills and tactical expertise. Jake Stevens, despite his shoulder wound, made a point of seeking Sarah out during the flight back to base. "I want to thank you," he said over the noise of the helicopter's engines. "Your shooting saved my life back there. Probably saved all our lives. I was wrong about everything I said before this mission started." Marcus Thompson overheard the conversation and added his own perspective. "Sarah, what you did out there was incredible. I've been in the Army for 6 years, and I've never seen shooting like that under pressure. You kept your head when everything was falling apart and made the shots that mattered most." David Kim, who had been coordinating with the pilot about their flight back to base, joined the conversation with his own assessment of Sarah's performance. "I'm going to recommend you for a commendation," he told her. "What you did during this mission was exceptional by any standard, but especially considering the circumstances we faced." Sarah appreciated the recognition from her teammates, but she was more satisfied by the knowledge that she had proven herself as a soldier when it mattered most. The doubts and prejudices that had surrounded her assignment to the reconnaissance unit had been replaced by hard-earned respect based on her actual performance under the most demanding conditions possible. As the helicopter approached their base, Sarah reflected on how much had changed during the past few days. She had begun the mission as a female soldier trying to prove herself worthy of inclusion in an elite unit. She was ending it as a proven combat veteran whose teammates trusted her with their lives, and whose skills had been validated under circumstances that left no room for doubt or qualification. The conversation she had overheard about women not being able to have kill counts seemed like it had happened in another lifetime. Sarah now understood that the real measure of a soldier's worth wasn't found in statistics or scorecards, but in their ability to accomplish the mission and bring their teammates home safely. By that standard, she had exceeded every possible expectation. However, Sarah also knew that her experience, while personally validating, represented just one example in an ongoing debate about women's roles in military service. Other female soldiers would face similar challenges and would need to prove themselves just as she had done. The progress toward full acceptance would be measured not in individual achievements, but in changing attitudes and policies that recognized competence over gender. As the helicopter touched down at their base, Sarah prepared for the debriefing sessions and medical evaluations that would follow any mission of this type. She also looked forward to the opportunity to rest and recover from what had been the most intense and dangerous experience of her military career. Most importantly, she was eager to return to duty with teammates who now saw her as a proven soldier rather than a woman trying to do a man's job. 3 weeks after the extraction, Sarah sat in the base recreation center watching the evening news with several of her fellow soldiers. The intelligence her reconnaissance team had gathered during their mission had been used to plan a major offensive that had successfully disrupted enemy operations and prevented what could have been a devastating attack on Allied forces. While the news reports couldn't mention the specific intelligence work that had made the operation possible, Sarah and her teammates knew that their dangerous mission had contributed directly to saving hundreds of lives. Jake Stevens approached her table with a somewhat embarrassed expression on his face. His shoulder wound was healing well, but he still wore a sling that reminded everyone of the firefight that had brought the team closer together than months of training ever could have accomplished. Since returning from the mission, Jake had made several attempts to apologize more thoroughly for his pre-mission comments about women in combat roles. "Sarah, I know I've already said this, but I really need you to understand how wrong I was about everything," Jake began earnestly. "I grew up in a small town where most people still had pretty traditional ideas about gender roles, and I just assumed that applied to military service too. What you did during that mission completely changed how I think about these things." Sarah looked up from her coffee and gestured for Jake to sit down. She had been expecting this conversation for several days and had given considerable thought to how she wanted to respond. The young soldier's attitudes had clearly been shaped by his background and inexperience rather than personal malice, and she appreciated his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes. "Jake, I understand where you are coming from," Sarah replied diplomatically. "A lot of people have doubts about women in combat because they've never seen it work successfully. The important thing is that you're willing to change your mind based on new evidence. That's what good soldiers do." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus Thompson, who was carrying a newspaper that had been circulating around the base all day. The headline read, "Female Soldiers Excel in Combat Roles," and the article discussed recent policy changes that would expand opportunities for women in previously restricted military occupations. "Have you seen this yet?" Marcus asked, showing them the newspaper. "They're talking about opening up even more combat positions to women based on performance data from recent deployments. I bet missions like ours are part of the evidence they're using to make these decisions." Sarah scanned the article quickly, noting quotes from senior military officials who emphasized that combat effectiveness should be based on individual qualifications rather than gender assumptions. The policy changes represented significant progress toward full integration of women in all military roles, but she knew that changing regulations was only the beginning of a longer process of changing attitudes and culture. David Kim joined the group, carrying official paperwork that he had been asked to deliver to Sarah personally. "Congratulations," he said with a genuine smile. "Your commendation was approved, and you're being considered for promotion ahead of the normal schedule. Colonel Harrison wants to see you tomorrow morning about a new assignment opportunity." Sarah accepted the paperwork with mixed emotions. Recognition for her performance was gratifying, but she also understood that her success carried additional pressure to continue proving that women could excel in combat roles. Every future mission would be scrutinized not just for her individual performance, but as evidence for or against broader policies about women in the military. That evening, Sarah walked around the base perimeter, using the quiet time to process everything that had happened during the past month. The physical challenges of the mission had been significant, but the psychological impact of proving herself to skeptical teammates had been equally demanding. She felt satisfied with her performance, but also aware that similar challenges awaited other women who would follow similar paths. Her thoughts were interrupted by the approach of Colonel Harrison, who had apparently been looking for her around the base. The commanding officer had a reputation for direct communication and had specifically requested to speak with Sarah privately before their official meeting the next morning. "Sergeant Martinez, I wanted to talk with you about what happened during your recent mission," Colonel Harrison began without preamble. "The after-action reports from your teammates were unanimous in crediting your performance as exceptional. More importantly, they all mentioned how your actions changed their perspectives about women in combat roles." Sarah listened carefully as the colonel continued. "I'm recommending you for assignment to the Special Operations Training Center as an instructor. It's a position that would allow you to train the next generation of elite soldiers while continuing to serve as an example of what women can accomplish in these roles." The offer was both flattering and daunting. Teaching at the Special Operations Training Center would be a significant career advancement, but it would also make her a highly visible representative of women's integration into combat specialties. Everything she did would be scrutinized by supporters and critics alike. "Colonel, I'm honored by the opportunity," Sarah replied carefully. "Can I ask what specific responsibilities would be involved?" Colonel Harrison smiled at her practical question. "You would be teaching advanced marksmanship, fieldcraft, and small unit tactics. More importantly, you would be working with soldiers who are just beginning to understand what it means to serve in integrated units. Your experience could help prevent the kind of problems that occurred at the beginning of your recent mission." Sarah understood the broader implications of what the colonel was describing. By serving as an instructor, she would have the opportunity to shape attitudes and expectations before they became entrenched prejudices. Young soldiers who trained under her guidance would begin their careers with a different understanding of women's capabilities in combat roles. "I would like to accept the assignment, sir," Sarah said after considering the opportunity carefully. "I think I can make a positive contribution to training programs while continuing my own professional development." The next morning brought a steady stream of visitors to Sarah's quarters as word spread about her new assignment. Several female soldiers from other units stopped by to congratulate her and to ask for advice about their own career goals. Sarah was struck by how many women were interested in combat specialties but had been discouraged by cultural barriers or institutional obstacles. One visitor was particularly memorable. Private Jennifer Walsh was a 19-year-old soldier from Ohio who had enlisted with the goal of joining Special Operations Forces, but had been repeatedly told that such positions were unrealistic for women. She had heard about Sarah's recent mission and wanted to understand what it would take to achieve similar success. "Sergeant Martinez, everyone is talking about what you did during that reconnaissance mission," Jennifer said with obvious excitement. "I've wanted to join Special Operations since I enlisted, but my drill sergeants keep suggesting I consider support roles instead. What advice would you give to someone like me?" Sarah looked at the young soldier and saw something of her younger self, full of determination but facing institutional skepticism about her goals. "Private Walsh, the most important thing is to focus on being the best soldier you can be in whatever role you're assigned," Sarah began. "Master the fundamentals, exceed every standard, and prove your competence consistently. Opportunities will come if you're ready for them." She paused before adding what she considered the most crucial advice. "Don't get discouraged by people who doubt your capabilities before they've seen you perform. Let your actions speak louder than their assumptions. That's ultimately what changed my teammates' minds during our recent mission." The conversation with Private Walsh reminded Sarah of her own journey from basic training to the reconnaissance unit. Every step had required her to prove herself against skepticism and lowered expectations. The new assignment as an instructor would give her the opportunity to help other women navigate similar challenges more effectively. 2 days later, Sarah found herself back in the recreation center with her former teammates, sharing a farewell meal before reporting to her new assignment. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly, a stark contrast to the tension that had characterized their early interactions before the mission. "You know what's funny?" Jake Stevens said as they finished eating. "I keep thinking about that conversation we had before deployment, about women not being able to have kill counts. It seems so stupid now, but at the time I really believed that combat effectiveness was just about physical strength and aggression." Marcus Thompson nodded in agreement. "I think a lot of us had pretty narrow ideas about what makes a good soldier." Sarah showed us that the most important qualities are things like accuracy under pressure, tactical thinking, and the ability to keep your head when everything goes wrong. Those aren't male or female characteristics. They're just good soldier characteristics. David Kim, who had been quiet during most of the meal, finally spoke up with his own reflection. The thing that impressed me most wasn't just Sarah's shooting, though that was incredible. It was how she stayed focused on the mission and taking care of the team instead of trying to prove a point about gender issues. That's real professionalism. Sarah appreciated her teammates' evolved perspectives, but she also wanted to make sure they understood the broader implications of what they had experienced together. "I'm glad our mission worked out well and that we all made it home safely," she said. "But I hope you guys remember this experience when you work with other women in combat roles. Not everyone will have the same background or abilities that I do, just like not every male soldier has the same capabilities. Judge people as individuals, not as representatives of their gender." The conversation continued for another hour, covering topics that ranged from specific tactical lessons learned during the mission to broader questions about military culture and integration policies. Sarah was impressed by how thoughtfully her teammates had processed the experience and how willing they were to reconsider assumptions they had held for years. As the evening wound down, Sarah reflected on the dramatic changes that had occurred since that first day when she overheard comments about women not belonging in combat roles. The same soldiers who had questioned her basic competence were now advocating for expanded opportunities for women in the military. More importantly, they were doing so based on direct experience, rather than abstract arguments about equality or fairness. The next morning, Sarah packed her belongings and prepared to report to the Special Operations Training Center. Her new role would bring different challenges and opportunities, but she felt confident that her recent experiences had prepared her for whatever lay ahead. The mission that had started as a test of her individual capabilities had become something larger, a demonstration of what was possible when soldiers were evaluated based on their performance rather than their gender. As she loaded her equipment into the transport vehicle, Sarah thought about the conversation she would have when she returned to base for visits. If someone made the same comment about women not being able to have kill counts, her response would be simple and factual. "I served with a female soldier who saved our entire team through her marksmanship and tactical expertise." Combat effectiveness isn't about gender. It's about competence, courage, and commitment to the mission and your teammates. The young soldiers she would be training in her new assignment would benefit from instructors who understood that lesson from the beginning.